I'm going to probably feel very unclever now on this interview because we're at a stand, and I'll just tell you what it says up there, the faith experiment. But this is not just science, this is a sort of breakdown of the scientific debate. So I'm completely out of my depth, I'll be honest, but hopefully to help me along the way, we've got husband and wife here, Matthew and Devinda. Now, tell us about your background first of all, because you're both scientists, aren't you?
Yeah. So with my background, I did physics at university and I gave my life to the Lord along the way. And now what I do in terms of using the science, I work in the hospital setting and I help plan radiotherapy treatments for people who have cancer, and I help maintain the radiotherapy machines to make sure that they're giving the right amount of radiation. And this project, the Science and Faith project, is something that we do on the side. Yeah.
So I'm a healthcare scientist by background as well. So I trained in medical physics a few years ago. I spent my kind of early 20s, late teens, kind of basically thinking you cannot be a scientist and a Christian. It just doesn't work. My scientific mind does not allow me to look at faith. It just doesn't work. Then about 10 years ago, I met Devinda, who was a scientist and a Christian, politely invited me to church a couple of times. I thought, I'll go because it's important to her and we're getting on quite well and all this kind of thing. And I just started from there looking into, is faith rational? Does it make sense? And actually found that it's much more compatible with science than I ever thought it could possibly be. And then, I became a Christian about 8 years ago.
It can be difficult, can't it? Because a lot of people, they only hear the arguments of people like Richard Dawkins because they're out there and they're so prominent. So people assume, well, he is clever, I'll believe him. But actually, do you think that if you delve into it further, it's not as simple as that, is it? It isn't just black and white.
Absolutely. So there are plenty of perhaps not as high-profile scientists who are Christians, who profess a Christian faith. There's so many books written by people much, much cleverer than us, aren't there, that have looked into various aspects, various conflicts, and really have thought about it and have good, reasonable answers to these conflicts. As you say, in the age of social media, sound bites get everywhere. So when you've got someone like Richard Dawkins who says these big sweeping statements, they get a lot of exposure, and it's people's impression that therefore with science and with the Christian faith that it's a choice. And what we want to put out there, along with so many others who work in the same field as us, is that no, it's not a choice. There is honestly a way that you can bring the two together. And in fact, science from the very beginning was something done by Christians to glorify God. And the message we have is that we want to bring it back to that.
Do you think it's changing? Because it seems as though there's a lot of people like you who are young, educated, and willing to challenge what was the norm.
I do really hope so, yeah. I think we've found in the last few years it's a really exciting time for science and faith because we've started doing this kind of work. Other projects are popping up all over the country trying to explore science and faith in a really positive way, which I think it's really exciting to see. And we're seeing kind of research coming out about how many scientists do actually hold a faith. Not all of them are Christians, which is fair enough, but quite a significant number of scientists hold to a faith. They believe that the material world as we see it is obviously important and worthy of study, but there is something more to be learned about spiritual things.
So there's a few questions I've got here. Now, bearing in mind, I've got no scientific background at all, but one thing I get challenged on is the origins of life. Now, I don't expect you both to now answer this question in just a few sentences. I know that this is a long, drawn-out thing, but what would you argue when people say, well, it was just slime? Basically, it was slime in a pond, and that over millions of years, that turned into a human being, and that's where we are now.
Yeah. What I would say to that is, well, that's absolutely fine. There are Christians who believe in that theory too. One question I guess I would ask you is, where did the slime come from, to put it simply? And also, how do we as humans, if we are just products of this evolutionary process, why is it we have things like wonder, beauty, things that we think about, things that matter more to us than just basic survival? We are altruistic, we look out for one another. People might say that's just societal sort of survival of the species. But there's more to it than that. We sacrifice ourselves for one another. We look at the world, we see that it's beautiful, despite that's not going to have any kind of survival advantage, and beyond which, we feel things like love, and as a society even just based on looking out for one another in a way that I think just is not explained by survival of the species.
And it does seem interesting because a lot of these scientists say, well, we can create something from nothing as long as we've got oxygen, as long as we've got such a thing. So in a sense, that isn't creating something from nothing because you've got the oxygen and you've got the things that you need to potentially create life.
Yeah. That's right, yeah. So in terms of the mechanisms of the creation of life, I don't necessarily have a problem with that happening through a kind of gradual evolutionary process and that kind of thing. But it goes a little bit deeper than that, because if you look at the fundamentals of the universe, the constants of physics that it's based on, the laws of mathematics, all these kind of things that all work together to make life possible in a way that chaos would be much more likely for a lot of these things. But what we see is this incredible order that is incredibly unlikely, leading to the possibility of life in our universe, which is just so incredible and just looks like it was just made to be that way to me.
Do you think as well that these conversations are useful? Because sometimes Christians, they just say words like, I don't really care the origins of life. As long as I've got a relationship with Jesus Christ, that's fine. What would you say to those people? Is this kind of thing important?
Well, what I would say is, if you're someone for whom this isn't a problem, that's great. Absolutely great. But we have to acknowledge for some it's a stumbling block. And so as Christians, we're called to tell the world about what Jesus did and about who God is. And so if this helps remove a stumbling block, it won't bring people to Jesus by itself, but if it's something that is a stumbling block for them and we can help move it out the way, then it's just something to help them along on the journey. And like I say, for some people, not a problem, fantastic, but we know for some it is. And that's where we want to work.